Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the 20th century's most dramatic, consequential, and, quite frankly, intensely debated historical upheavals, the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Think about it. In just a matter of months, an ancient, deeply entrenched monarchy totally collapsed. A brand new Islamic Republic rose right in its place, and the entire balance of global politics was literally turned upside down. But what exactly was this revolution? Was it a heroic, anti-imperialist struggle for independence, or was it a conservative, religious backlash against the modern world?
You know, to really wrap our heads around this, historian Airband Abrahamian poses this super fascinating paradox. He says, the revolution was not simply Islamic, it was also populist, nationalist, and anti-imperialist. And that perfectly hooks us into the core mystery we're unpacking today. Because if we just look at 1979 as purely a religious event, we completely miss the bigger picture. This was a deeply complex political explosion, one that fused mass politics with religious ideology on a scale the world had never really seen before.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the shock of 1979, look at the roots of the uprising, break down the fall of the Shah, debate whether this was an awakening or a religious backlash, and finally wrap up with the global aftermath. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The Shock of 1979. Honestly, it's really hard to overstate just how completely this event caught the entire world off guard. We're talking about a revolution that somehow, against all odds, managed to unite liberals, Marxists, and fundamentalist clerics. They all actually worked together to overthrow the incredibly powerful US-backed monarchy of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. And yet, this amazingly diverse Big Tent coalition ultimately resulted in a strict theocracy. It creates this massive gap in our understanding, right? How on earth did such vastly different ideological groups join forces in the first place? Which brings us to Section 2, Roots of the Uprising. To truly understand 1979, we literally have to hit the rewind button. Decades back. In 1925, Reza Shah took power. He centralized authority and pushed to secularize parts of society. But, as you might guess, Iran's massive oil reserves made it a total magnet for foreign influence, especially from Britain. This tension builds up to 1951, when nationalist Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh absolutely electrified the developing world by nationalizing Iran's oil industry. It was a huge moment. But just 2 years later, in 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. He was ousted in a coup orchestrated by the CIA and Britain's MI6, which put the Shah back in power. And let me tell you, that 1953 coup planted deep, generational seeds of anti-imperialist resentment. For so many Iranians, it became the ultimate glaring symbol of Western interference. Then, fast forward to the 1960s, the restored Shah launched his incredibly ambitious modernization program, which he called the White Revolution. So the Shah's White Revolution was kind of this classic tale of two realities. On one hand, you had this rapid, sweeping modernization. We're talking land redistribution, literacy campaigns, women's suffrage, and this booming infrastructure, all fueled by massive oil wealth. I mean, Tehran became a highly modern cosmopolitan city. But you have to look at the realities on the ground. Wealth became heavily concentrated among a small group of elites connected to the monarchy. The sheer speed of these changes caused severe cultural dislocation and skyrocketing inflation. And to keep a lid on it all, the Shah relied heavily on Savak. That was a deeply fierce secret police force known for monitoring dissidents, censoring the opposition, and brutally using torture. So what you end up with is rapid modernization without democratization, which produced a deeply alienated society across pretty much all social classes. All right, moving on to Section 3, the fall of the Shah. By the late 1970s, between the economic instability and severe political repression, Iran had basically reached the breaking point. And right then, a key opposition figure stepped into the spotlight, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. From exile, he did something incredibly brilliant and subversive. He took Shia religious symbolism and seamlessly fused it with revolutionary politics. And how did he spread the word? Smuggled cassette tapes. Think of these tapes as the viral tweets or TikToks of the 1970s. While secular revolutionaries were out there using dry, academic political theory, Khomeini used religious language that was deeply familiar and meaningful to everyday, ordinary Iranians. He framed the Shah not just as a bad politician, but as a literal tyrant comparable to the most hated villains in Shia history. That gave the resistance immense emotional weight and moral legitimacy. So how did the actual collapse go down? Well, it all started with a single spark in January 1978. a government-sponsored newspaper published a blatant insult against Khomeini. Religious students naturally protested in the city of Qom, and security forces opened fire, tragically killing protesters. And that was the fatal blow to the monarchy, because in Shia tradition, mourning commemorations happen every 40 days. So 40 days after those killings in Qom, more protests were held to mourn the dead, which led to more clashes, more deaths, and then subsequent 40-day mourning cycles that just snowballed. Eventually, it cascaded into millions of people filling the streets and these massive countrywide strikes that completely paralyzed the oil sector. And just look at who was actually out there in those streets. You had this astonishingly broad anti-Shah coalition. You're seeing Islamic clerics marching shoulder to shoulder with Marxists, liberal Democrats, university students, traditional bazaar merchants, factory workers, and nationalists. By this point, the state had entirely lost its legitimacy. Decades of political repression had effectively united groups of people who, let's be real, otherwise had absolutely nothing in common. But they were all hyper-focused on one single goal: removing the Shah. 14. That's a vital number here. It represents the 14 long years Ayatollah Khomeini spent in exile. But in February 1979, with the Shah having finally fled the country, Khomeini returned to Tehran. Millions of people flooded the streets to welcome him in a scene that looked like a religious pilgrimage merged right into a political revolution. Within just a few days, the monarchy totally collapsed.
Now for Section 4, Awakening or Religious Backlash. Almost the second the Shah fell, a totally new struggle kicked off over what was actually going to replace the monarchy. And historians generally view this through two dominant lenses. Was it an anti-imperialist awakening, focused primarily on challenging U.S. hegemony and restoring national dignity after decades of foreign exploitation? Or was it a religious backlash, focused on institutionalizing clerical authority and actively suppressing secular modernity? Well, as we dive into the sources, we see it's actually a pretty profound duality. Let's look at the anti-imperialist side first. 444. That staggering number represents the days of the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis. In November 1979, radical students took 52 Americans hostage in Tehran. And why did they do it? Well, because the deep trauma of that 1953 CIA coup heavily shaped their revolutionary fears. They genuinely believed the US was plotting right then to overthrow their new government, just like they had overthrown Mossadegh decades earlier. For a lot of folks in the developing world, this drastic defiance proved that a heavily armed, Western-backed monarchy could in fact be dismantled by sheer mass mobilization. But what about the religious backlash argument? Well, that basically comes down to this one crucial doctrine, Vilayat al-Faqih, or guardianship of the Islamic jurist. See, while secular liberals, Marxists, and nationalists were all fighting over their different visions for the new state, Khomeini outmaneuvered them all by establishing this specific doctrine. It legally granted ultimate, unquestionable political power to senior religious leadership. The revolution was fundamentally shifting away from a broad, inclusive coalition directly into a theocracy. The realities of this new Islamic Republic became crystal clear and fast. The new government instituted mandatory Islamic dress codes, rapidly expanded Sharia-based laws, brutally suppressed secular political opposition, and enforced severe media censorship. The liberals, feminists, and leftists who had literally just been marching in the streets against the Shah suddenly found themselves sidelined, imprisoned, or even worse. The revolution they fought so hard for was, tragically for them, not the revolution they ended up getting. Finally, Section 5, the global aftermath. Internally, it was actually a massive external event that cemented the new regime's grip on power. In 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, and this devastating, grueling Iran-Iraq war actually enabled the swift consolidation and militarization of the new revolutionary state. The Islamic Republic utilized those wartime conditions to essentially shut down dissent, framing the conflict not just as a patriotic defense of the homeland, but as a sacred religious duty. We also see this really profound paradox in the societal aftermath, especially when you look at women. In post-1979 Iran, women were heavily restricted by compulsory hijab and deeply rolled back family laws. Yet, at the exact same time, they were mobilized. They continued participating heavily in education, in journalism, and in political activism. Eventually, they became central figures in reform movements, challenging the state from within. It's an incredibly complex dynamic where they were legally restricted, yet remained highly active, vocal participants in society. Globally, the footprint of this revolution is absolutely massive.
It completely fractured US-Iranian relations, shifting Iran overnight from a key Cold War ally to a fierce adversary. It inspired the rise of political Islam far beyond its own borders. It deeply intensified Sunni-Shia geopolitical tensions, which seriously alarmed neighboring Arab monarchies. And it ignited these ongoing global debates over the viability of secularism in Muslim societies. Honestly, this specific history directly shapes the geopolitics and the foreign policies we see dominating the news today. So let's bring this whole thing full circle. Looking at the evidence across our sources, it's clear the 1979 revolution was both an awakening and a backlash. It completely defies simplistic categorization. It was modern, yet highly traditional. It was fiercely nationalist, yet deeply religious. It was populist in its incredible mass mobilization, yet ultimately authoritarian in its final result. It was this intense, complex fusion of genuine grievances like foreign interference, vast economic inequality, and political repression, all merging into a force that quite literally transformed history. And that leaves us with some pretty profound, honestly unresolved questions drawn directly from our sources today. Can religion and democracy truly coexist within revolutionary politics? Can an anti-imperialist movement avoid eventually sliding into authoritarianism? And ultimately, who truly owns a revolution once the old regime finally falls? The 1979 Iranian Revolution stands as one of history's great turning points, precisely because, all these decades later, we are still searching for those answers.